Well, let's plug in two names here. Brian Drake wants to know, what would you do with Hall and Nash if you didn't have the nWo angle? Well, they've always been a team. Who would they work with? Did you have other ideas they pitched or that were they said no to, or maybe were just left on the creative floor? So in this alternate timeline, Eric, you don't have an nWo idea. You don't have an invasion angle, but you have signed the former Diesel and the former Razor. They're coming back to a company where they were the Diamond Stud and they were Vinny
And
Vegas and Oz. So these are less than awesome ideas creatively, but they're back now and they're back as bigger stars. Would you still pair them together because, you know, they had been on the other channel? But I don't know if that even makes sense. But is it even possible to imagine a world where they're not doing the nWo? What would that look like in WCW, Eric?
That's funny. You say the very end of your, right before you finish, is the most interesting one, because as you're asking me that question, I said to myself, I can't even imagine what I would have done if it wasn't an nWo idea, just because it's, you know, it is what it is. Well, part of this is easy because I know I wouldn't have booked him as a tag team because, for obvious reasons, at that time, as I've said many times before on this show and others, tag team wrestling was just not my idea of a good idea, just from a cost perspective. And we were still managing costs pretty carefully back then. And once I made up my mind about tag teams and said, okay, you can have one every now and then, you could feature it, but you're not going to have a tag team division, so to speak. So that it was a regular part of every show. I'd already made up my mind about that. So the idea of bringing them in as a tag team because they came from WWE together, it would not have crossed my mind. They would have been in singles competition. In terms of who would they have worked with, man.
Nash and Hogan feels obvious, right?
Well, yeah, that's an easy one. Although I also would have recognized that bringing in Nash and turning him heel immediately, probably could have worked, but it would not have been optimal. Just wouldn't have been optimal. You can't come off a character, especially that had the exposure that Diesel did, and just have him show up as something completely different and pretend it didn't happen.
Right.
That's not good. So I would have tried to find a way. If Nash would have been for Hogan, I would have looked at that as 3 months from now, maybe 6 months from now, bring him in, let him get his babyface reaction, and then build something where it'd end up with him and Hogan. And that would have been obvious just because of Kevin's size.
I know the internet is going to say it, so I just need to say it to you here. Diesel was a heel when he left the WWF, but to your point, whenever a big star appears for the first time, they get a hero's welcome because you get the superstar. Oh, I'm familiar with that guy. I'm excited he's here. So you get a babyface pop, even if he is a heel, right?
Right. And I should have been clear about that. You especially coming at that time, because Nitro was just beginning to get hot. You go back and look at 95 and early 96 prior to nWo. A lot of, again, bullshit narrative. Nitro, it wasn't even competitive until the nWo. People forget that we started beating WWE in 1995.
Yeah.
It was probably 50-50 every single week until, 96 in the nWo angle, and then it became lopsided. So we had already created a significant amount of awareness and had that crowd, who we had grown substantially, as well as our television audience by that point, seen Diesel come in. He could have walked through the door biting the heads off chickens, and they still would have popped for him because they would have liked Ricky Starks. They're just happy to see action. I don't mean physical action, but I mean transitions. Oh my God, he's here. So yeah, he would have got a babyface reaction no matter what. But I would have taken some time to build him and to do it with a story. And Hogan more than likely would have demanded that as well. Hall, I don't know, man. Hall and Flair. just sitting here right now. That'd be a hell of a matchup.
Yeah. And they worked together in the WWF. So fans who saw Razor and Ric Flair in 92, yeah, I could see that. But it is interesting to think, like, what would you even call them? Like, we saw a lot of guys when they came from WCW or from the WWF into WCW. We're going to use silly knockoff names, like we have Shark for Earthquake, or we have the Boss for the Big Boss Man. So it's like, we know we can't really call him exactly that. So we'll get close. Hey, he's not Nails. He's the Prisoner. Like, I can only imagine what terrible name we may have given these guys as Razor Ramon. And I mean, would you have gone Scott Hall, or is there a chance?
Yes. At this point in time, Bill Goldberg, Ernest the Cat Miller, it's not just what I'm saying to you today. It's what I did back then, because back then I made up my mind. Again, you got to go back to the very beginning when I had my yellow legal pad sitting in the office after I walked out of Ted's office and had 2 hours of primetime television dumped on my lap. Oh, by the way, go compete with WWE. See ya. I don't want to talk about China TV anymore. Just go do that. So I'm sitting in my room, in my office, with the door locked, my phone on Do Not Disturb, my version of it back then. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I do this? I've just been handed either the greatest opportunity in the world or the gun in which I can load the bullet myself and put myself out of my own misery career-wise. It was one or the other. How do I do it? And because I didn't even have time to think about it. I would have never, if somebody would have said to me 24 hours earlier, by the way, here's my crystal ball. You're going to go in for this meeting with Ted Turner to talk about Star TV in China. Well, you're never going to get there, because Ted's going to give you 2 hours or whatever it is to go head to head with Monday Night Raw. I would have laughed at him. This is your high as fuck. Ain't happening. Never going to happen. So when it did happen, I had no idea what I was going to do. Zero. I know. It's not that I think. I know I hadn't spent 10 seconds up until that day thinking about competing with WWE. My focus was to try to make WCW first and foremost profitable. That was my first goal. Mandate. Turn that $1 profit. And then all the rest of the goals kind of came in underneath that. But at that point in time, one of the things on my list of things to do different than WWE was, as I've said many times, shoot for the 18 to 49-year-old male audience, because WWE's not. It's a ripe apple just hanging off the tree. They don't want it. I'll take it. That was one. But along with that, there's kind of like subcategories to that strategy. And one of them is get away from the cartoonish, get away from the overly animated, get away from everything that you can without damaging the product that have become so ingrained in the culture of the audience that people are going to be shocked when you don't do it anymore. All right. I didn't think through it quite to that level, but pretty close. I knew I didn't want to come up with gimmick names anymore, if possible. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's a gimmick name that's really appropriate. But the difference, again, between WCW at the time and WWE at that time is WWE had enjoyed the benefits of a extremely robust licensing and merchandising business. WCW didn't have it. There was a little bit of licensing here or there, very unsuccessful and not very well sustained over time. We'd get a video game in every once in a while, or we get some deal that would come in, everybody get excited. But in the big scheme of things, they were nickels and dimes. So while in WWE, knowing that 25% of your revenue, which at that point in time, I think licensing and merchandising was really 25% of their gross receipts. If that's such an important part of your business, you're going to approach new talent coming in much differently than I did, because I didn't have any licensing and merchandising. It was not a priority. Therefore, if that wasn't a priority, what is? 18 to 49-year-old males, and they don't want goofy animated cartoon names. We'll just give them their real name, like Ernest Miller, Bill Goldberg, others.
It's interesting to think about, because I know you said without hesitation, you went right into Scott Hall. But that's the same year where we're debuting the Blood Runs Cold thing. And we've got Glacier basically doing a Mortal Kombat ripoff. Would there have been an idea?
It was a tribute. It wasn't a ripoff. It was a tribute.
My bad. Virtua Fighter, which may not ring a bell to you. It rings a bell to everyone my age. It was the #1 video game in Japan in '95. It became an arcade game, and we all fell in love with it. And it's a fighting game, so it's a lot like, Mortal Kombat in that regard. Was there ever going to be any sort of, if the Blood Runs Cold thing had been a hit and had gone well, do you think you would have continued to draw on inspiration from other video games or no?
It depends how successful it would have become. And again, just because I was sitting in my office with a legal pad coming up with things that I wanted to do differently, it's not like, okay, from now on, everybody that comes to the door is going to use their real name. It wasn't that. Just in this particular case, because of these two particular people, definitely wanted to go down that road, as opposed to the Blood Runs Cold gimmick. But keep in mind, the Blood Runs Cold idea, the idea of Glacier came about before Ray Lloyd did. In other words, the idea to develop that cast of characters was specifically because I wanted to attract the attention of video games. I wanted to attract the attention of that portion of the audience that was under 18. Again, when I say target 18 to 49, that doesn't mean exclude everybody else, but you focus a little bit more there because that's your core audience, but you can't ignore the fringe, right? So that, the whole Glacier thing was, okay, we don't have a licensing and merchandising business. We don't have it. It doesn't really exist. So how do we get it to exist? I know we create characters very specifically for one part of a very popular video game genre. So the intent going into Blood Runs Cold from the original idea, when the idea popped into my head, was specifically to try to achieve what we didn't have, which was licensing and merchandising.